Howdy, folks. I am glad to see you. Today we have a special tale for you. Let's go.
In the vast silence of the West, a soul's true value is not in what it owns, but in the courage it shows. This is a story of a spirit that could not be sold. Lillian watched her father's silhouette shrink against the blood-red sunset. Marcus Blackwood did not look back. In his hand, he clutched not a rein, but a deed to land he had just acquired in exchange for his only daughter. Her future was the price for a patch of earth rumored to hold gold. The air around her smelled of sagebrush and betrayal. Warriors of the Aranai tribe encircled her now. Their faces were like stone masks, carved with stories she could not read. She felt a profound emptiness, a cold space where a father's love was supposed to be. The transaction was complete. She was no longer Lillian Blackwood. She was currency, spent on a gamble of greed in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the West. Their chief, Hakan, sat upon his horse, observing from a distance. He was not the brute from the traders' tales. His gaze was sharp, like that of a hawk, and it held no triumph of ownership, only cold assessment. He looked through her, seeing not a frightened young woman, but a piece on a game board, a game whose rules she did not yet understand. When their eyes met across the dusty plain, she saw no pity and no cruelty in his stare. There was only a depth in which a person could drown, a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. He seemed to weigh her spirit, judging her worth in a currency far different from her father's. A silent challenge passed between them in that fleeting moment. As the last ray of sun vanished behind the horizon, Lillian's hand closed around the small pewter locket her mother had given her. It was a simple thing, a smooth oval worn down by years of touch, but it was the only piece of her old life she had left. Inside was a tiny, faded portrait of a woman with kind eyes, a woman who would never have imagined such a fate for her child. The cold metal felt like an anchor in a storm of uncertainty. It was a tangible link to a past that now felt like a dream. She clutched it tightly, the edges digging into her palm, a small pain to distract from the larger ache in her soul. It was a promise to the memory of her mother. In that desolate moment, surrounded by strangers in a world she did not know, Lillian made a silent vow. Her father could sell her body, but he would never break her spirit. She would survive this. She would learn the ways of these people, understand their language, and decipher the intentions behind their stone-like expressions. She would not be a passive victim in this cruel play. She would learn the rules of this strange, brutal game, and one day she would find a way to win. The chilling night wind swept across the prairie, but inside Lillian, a small, defiant flame had been lit. It was a fire of pure will, a promise to endure and overcome what was done to her. The first weeks in the Aranai village were a relentless test of endurance. Unfamiliar work made her muscles ache. The strange taste of the food was a constant reminder of her displacement, and the language sounded like the wind rushing through a canyon. The women of the tribe treated her with a cautious suspicion. They watched her clumsy attempts to perform daily tasks with a mixture of pity and disdain. Her fine dress was soon replaced with practical deerskin, and her soft hands became calloused and rough. Every sunrise brought a new set of challenges, a new lesson in humility and survival. She was a fragile flower, transplanted into the harshest soil, and she had to learn to grow thorns. One warrior in particular, Kale, viewed her with open contempt. His eyes were full of jealousy, for he believed Hakan had made a grave mistake by bringing a stranger into their home. He saw her as a weakness in his chief, a symbol of a world that was encroaching on their traditions. He never missed an opportunity to make a sharp comment in his tongue, just loud enough for her to hear. "The pale flower will wilt under our sun," he would say to his friends, their laughter echoing her isolation. Kale's animosity was a constant, sharp stone in her shoe, a reminder that she was not just an outsider, but an unwelcome one to some, making her daily struggle even harder. But there were flickers of light in the darkness. An elderly woman named Orenda, whose hands were as wrinkled as old tree bark, and whose eyes held the wisdom of many winters, became her silent mentor. Orenda rarely spoke, but her gestures were more eloquent than any words. She showed Lillian how to distinguish edible roots from poisonous ones, how to treat animal hides until they were as soft as silk, and how to read the coming weather in the clouds. Orenda's quiet guidance was a lifeline, a steady hand that kept Lillian from sinking into despair. It was a teaching without words, a connection of pure intent that transcended the language barrier. A young woman named Nita, whose laughter sounded like a bubbling stream, also offered a tentative hand of friendship. Sometimes she would leave a small bundle of wild berries near Lillian's sleeping robes, a silent offering of sweetness in a bitter world. Lillian clung to these small acts of humanity like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood. She learned, she watched, and she waited. She tried to solve the puzzle of the chief Hakan, who held her fate in his hands yet remained as distant and unapproachable as the snow-capped mountains on the horizon. His silence was a wall she had yet to learn how to breach, but she was determined to find a way. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a violent thunderstorm. The heavy rain caused a section of the horse corral to collapse, sending the animals into a state of panic. While the warriors tried to calm the frightened herd, a beautiful mare became tangled in the fallen branches. In her terror, she thrashed wildly, risking a broken leg. Kale and his friends only shouted, their harsh voices making the animal more frantic. The situation was escalating, and the valuable horse was in grave danger. The chaos of the storm mirrored the turmoil inside Lillian, but a sudden memory gave her an idea. She knew what she had to do. She had to try. Remembering how her mother used to soothe unruly stallions, Lillian began to hum a soft, old lullaby. Her voice, clear and calm, cut through the noise of the rain and the panicked cries of the warriors. The frantic mare froze, her ears twitching as she turned her head toward the source of the gentle sound. The melody was a stark contrast to the chaos. A small island of peace in a sea of fear. The other horses also seemed to quiet, their agitated movements slowing as the simple tune worked its magic. It was a language that all creatures understood, a sound of peace and reassurance that had no need for words. Lillian took a slow step forward. Hakan, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, signaled for his warriors to step back. His eyes were fixed on Lillian, a new expression on his face, one she had never seen before. He slowly approached her and held out a sharp knife. "Free her," he said in his language, his voice a low command that carried a surprising amount of trust. Lillian took the knife and walked toward the terrified animal, never breaking her song. She moved with a gentle confidence she did not know she possessed. Under the calming influence of her voice, she was able to carefully cut the branches that ensnared the horse. The mare stood still, allowing her to work until she was finally free. That evening, for the first time, Hakan spoke to her not as a captive, but as an equal. He asked her where she had learned the song. This was the beginning of their conversations, a fragile bridge built between two very different worlds. Later, when Kale tried to mock her, Hakan silenced him. "Courage does not depend on the color of one's skin," he declared, his voice firm. His words echoed through the main lodge, a clear message to all. This public defense not only strengthened Lillian's position within the tribe, but also planted the first seed of respect in her heart for the chief, a seed that might one day grow into something much more profound. Hundreds of miles away, in the smoky haze of a frontier town saloon, Marcus Blackwood raised his glass of whiskey. Across the table, a ruthless mercenary named Fletcher grinned, his smile a crooked line across his scarred face. "Everything is proceeding as planned, Marcus," Fletcher rasped, his voice like gravel. "Soon, the rumors of how those savages abducted your dear daughter will reach the fort. The soldiers will be furious." Marcus nodded, a look of pure satisfaction on his face. The land deed he had received from Hakan was nothing but a diversion. His true plan was far more treacherous, a web of lies designed to bring ruin. "They believe they have a right to the land after giving me horses and taking her," Marcus said, a cruel glint in his eyes. "But that document is a forgery. I hold the real title. When the army comes to rescue Lillian and finds her gone, they will wipe those heathens from the face of the earth." He took a long drink of his whiskey, savoring the taste of his own cunning. His plan was a masterpiece of deceit. He would not only get his daughter back, but also trigger a conflict that would serve his ultimate goal. He felt no remorse, only the cold thrill of a predator closing in on its prey. He was a man willing to sacrifice anyone for his greed. Fletcher let out a harsh laugh. "You are a genius, Blackwood. Using your own daughter as bait, it is truly impressive." Marcus smiled. "She serves a greater purpose now. She will make me a very rich man." The plan was simple and brutal. After the Aranai were eliminated, he, the grieving father, would not only get the land back, but also receive a handsome compensation from the government for his loss. And most importantly, he would gain undisputed access to the gold that he was certain lay hidden beneath the Aranai village. It was a prize worth any price, even the soul of his own child. He had gambled everything on this. Their laughter was swallowed by the loud noise of the saloon, but the shadow of their conspiracy was already stretching far to the west. It was a dark and hungry shadow, threatening to engulf innocent lives in its path. Marcus Blackwood and Fletcher were not just plotting for land or gold. They were orchestrating a tragedy. They were setting the stage for a conflict that would be built on lies and fueled by prejudice. And at the center of their deadly game was Lillian, completely unaware that her father was not just a traitor, but the architect of her potential destruction. The wheels of their cruel design were already in motion, turning steadily toward her. An unexpected blizzard swept across the prairies far earlier than anyone had anticipated. A furious wind and blinding snow cut the village off from the world, a white prison of ice and cold. Hunting became impossible, and the tribe's winter stores were dangerously low. During a desperate attempt to retrieve some preserved meat from a cracking ice cache by the river, Hakan slipped on the slick surface and fell hard. His leg was badly injured. The wound was deep, a jagged gash that, while not immediately fatal, posed a severe threat of infection in the harsh conditions. The survival of the entire village now hung in the balance, with their leader incapacitated. Kale, ever the opportunist, used Hakan's misfortune to his advantage. He began to spread whispers among the worried tribe members. "The spirits are angry," he hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "They are punishing us for the presence of this outsider. Her arrival has brought this curse of cold and hunger upon us." His poisonous words found fertile ground in the hearts of the fearful. The tribe, already on edge, began to look at Lillian with renewed suspicion and hostility. She was no longer just a stranger. She was a potential source of their doom, a scapegoat for their mounting anxieties. The cold outside was matched by the growing chill within the community. Lillian saw that the traditional herbal remedies were not enough to combat Hakan's rising fever. Desperate, she remembered something different, a poultice her mother used for deep wounds. She asked a hesitant Arenda to bring her a special type of gray clay from the riverbank, and a specific lichen that grew only on the north side of the oldest trees. She crushed the dried lichen into a powder and mixed it with the clay and warm water, creating a thick, soothing paste. The other women watched her with skepticism, their faces etched with doubt. But Arenda, seeing the determination in Lillian's eyes, gave a slow nod of approval. All through the long, freezing night, Lillian remained by Hakan's side. She carefully cleaned his wound and applied the fresh poultices, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. As the first light of dawn filtered through the lodge, the fever finally broke. Hakan opened his eyes and saw her weary face, her features softened by the dim light. In his gaze, she saw not just gratitude or respect, but something warmer and deeper, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. Their shared struggle against the relentless cold and the threat of death had brought them closer than any conversations ever could. They had weathered the storm together. When the blizzard finally subsided, the scouts brought back disturbing news. Fletcher's men had begun raiding small homesteads and trade caravans, leaving behind arrows with arrowheads identical to those used by the Aranai. The attacks were brutal and calculated. Rumors of the savage Aranai spread like a prairie fire from one settlement to the next. Fear and anger grew with each passing day. A detachment of soldiers, led by a determined captain, had already been dispatched from the nearest fort to deliver justice. Wates. It was a perfectly laid trap. Fletcher and Marcus were not just starting a conflict. They were directing it with a puppeteer's skill. Tension gripped the village. The news of the soldiers and the false accusations created an atmosphere of fear and distrust. During a tense council of elders, Kale openly challenged Hakan's leadership. "Your softness for this woman has brought ruin upon us," he shouted. his voice filled with a mixture of fear and ambition. "You brought an enemy into our home, and now we will all pay the price with our blood. She is a bad omen." His words resonated with those who were terrified of the encroaching world and the soldiers who represented its power. The tribe was fractured, split between loyalty to their chief and the growing fear of annihilation. Hakan, still recovering from his injury, faced the most difficult choice of his life. He could protect his people by casting Lillian out, handing her over to the soldiers to prove their innocence. This was the logical path, the one that would appease the fearful and perhaps avert a disastrous conflict. It was the choice of a pragmatist, a leader putting the needs of the many above the fate of one. But it felt like a betrayal of the trust that had grown between them. He looked at Lillian, seeing not an omen or an enemy, but a brave woman who had shown him nothing but kindness and courage. He saw the spirit that had captivated him. Or he could trust his heart and risk everything to protect her. This path was fraught with danger. It meant defying the soldiers, confronting Fletcher's treachery, and potentially leading his people into a war they could not win. It was a choice that pitted his duty as a chief against the feelings that had taken root in his soul. The weight of his decision was immense. The future of his people and the life of the woman who had saved him rested entirely on his shoulders. The entire village watched him, waiting for his word, a word that would decide all of their fates in this growing storm. He was trapped between two impossible choices. That night, Hakan came to Lillian's lodge. The small fire cast long, dancing shadows on the walls as he told her the whole truth. He spoke of her father's forged deed, the carefully planned provocations, and the real reason he had brought her to his village. "I saw the deceit in your father's eyes that day," he said, his voice low and heavy with regret. "I knew he would use you in his scheme. I thought you would be safer here with us than in his hands. I was wrong." His confession was a shock. He had not stolen her out of malice. He had tried to save her in his own way. His act was not one of possession, but of protection. The air between them was thick with unspoken emotions. The revelation reframed everything she had endured. "They are not just coming for the land, Lillian," Hakan continued, his gaze intense. "They are coming for you. You are the only witness who can expose your father's lies. They cannot afford to let you live." Faced with this mortal danger, all pretense fell away. They were no longer chief and captive, but two people bound together by a shared threat. Their survival was now intertwined. The game her father had started had now reached its most dangerous stage, and she was the main prize, her life the final piece to be removed from the board. With trembling hands, Lillian took the pewter locket from her neck. It was her most precious possession, the last tangible link to her mother's love. "My mother always said this would protect me from harm," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You must take it, for your journey." She placed the locket in his hand. Hakan looked at the small object, then reached into a pouch at his belt. He pulled out a small, smooth riverstone, polished by years of touch. A hawk was carefully etched into its surface. It was his personal totem, a symbol of his strength and spirit. He had carried it since he was a boy. It was a part of him. "As long as you hold this, my heart remains here with you," Hakan said, pressing the stone into her palm. The exchange was more than just a trading of gifts. It was a silent vow, a sacred promise to fight for each other, no matter the cost. It was an acknowledgement of the deep bond that had grown between them, a bond forged in hardship and sealed in trust. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the vast and dangerous prairie, they were no longer from two different worlds. They were two hearts beating as one, preparing to face the coming storm together. Their promise was sealed, not with words, but with pieces of their souls. Hakan and his most trusted warriors rode out at dawn. They were not seeking a fight, but a parley, hoping to intercept the soldiers and expose Fletcher's treachery before any blood was shed. Lillian remained in the village, where every passing hour felt like an eternity. The weight of waiting was a physical burden, a heavy cloak of anxiety she could not cast off. The air in the village was thick with tension. The remaining inhabitants moved about their tasks with a somber quietness, their faces etched with worry. Everyone knew what was at stake. Lillian watched the empty horizon, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She prayed for a peaceful resolution. Her prayers went unanswered. The internal conflict in the village exploded. Kale, seizing the opportunity of Hakon's absence, attempted a power grab. "Hakon has abandoned us," he declared to the assembled tribe. "He has led our best warriors into a trap for the sake of an outsider. We must choose a new leader, one who will protect us." His words were a direct challenge to Hakon's authority. But Arenda, her old eyes blazing with fury, stepped forward. Supported by the warriors who had remained loyal to their chief, she faced Kale down. "Hakon is our leader," she stated, her voice surprisingly strong. "He fights for all of us. We will not betray him." The next day, a lone scout returned. He was barely alive, his horse collapsing from exhaustion at the edge of the village. "It was an ambush," the warrior gasped, his words coming in ragged breaths. "But not the soldiers, it was Fletcher. He was waiting for us in the canyon." The news hit the village like a physical blow. Hakon had walked right into a trap. The scout struggled to continue. Hakon, he knew they would come here next. For her. He looked directly at Lillian, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and despair. "He sent me back. To warn you. He stayed behind. To buy us time." The entire village fell into a shocked silence. The full weight of his sacrifice crushed Lillian. Hakon had not been ambushed by chance. He had anticipated Fletcher's move, and knowingly walked into the trap. He had sacrificed himself and his warriors to give the village a chance to prepare, to give her a chance to survive. Now, the ruthless mercenary, the man who knew that Lillian was the only living witness who could ruin his employer's scheme, was leading his band of killers directly to them. The hope for a peaceful resolution was gone, replaced by the certainty of a desperate fight for survival. And Lillian was the reason they were all in danger. She was the target. Fletcher and Marcus Blackwood appeared on the ridge overlooking the village. Their figures silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun, they rode with the arrogance of conquerors, expecting to find a leaderless and terrified people. But a surprise awaited them. The village was not in chaos. The Aranai, though few in number, stood ready, their faces grim and determined. And then, to Marcus's utter shock, a lone figure stepped out from the ranks of the warriors. It was Lillian. Her hair was braided in the Aranai fashion, and she wore the deerskin dress of the tribe. She looked nothing like the timid girl he had sold months ago. "Father!" Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the silent valley. The word made Marcus flinch as if struck. "Have you come to finalize your deal?" Fletcher let out a cruel laugh. "The little girl wants to play hero. Give her to us, and maybe we will let the rest of you savages live." His words dripped with contempt. He raised his rifle, confident that the fight was already won. He saw only a handful of warriors and a defiant girl. But his confidence was premature. He had underestimated his opponents. He had underestimated the will of a people fighting for their home, and he had badly underestimated Lillian. At that very moment, a hawk's cry echoed from the canyons. It was a signal. From behind the rocks and ridges, Hakon and his warriors emerged, surrounding the band of mercenaries. They had not been defeated, they had outmaneuvered Fletcher, leading him into their own trap. Hakon looked at Marcus, his face calm but his eyes like chips of ice. "Your game is over, Blackwood," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The tables had turned completely. The hunters had become the hunted. Fletcher and his men were caught, their escape routes cut off. They were trapped by the very people they had come to destroy. Lillian stepped forward, holding the forged land deed in her hand. "You sold me for this piece of paper. You betrayed your own blood for a lie, for gold that does not even exist." She looked directly into her father's eyes, her own filled not with hatred, but with a profound and sorrowful pity. "I have seen the maps you studied so carefully, Father. There is no gold on this land. There is nothing here for you but the truth of your own empty heart." She let the deed fall from her fingers, and the wind carried it away. The look on Marcus Blackwood's face was a terrible mixture of rage, shame, and utter defeat. He had been undone by the daughter he had so casually discarded. Surrounded and exposed, Fletcher and Marcus had no chance. The Aranai warriors disarmed them without a single shot being fired. The mercenaries, so bold just moments before, now stood as defeated prisoners. The question before Hakan was what to do with them. By the laws of the prairie, their treachery deserved the harshest punishment. The tribe looked to their chief, their faces grim, expecting a sentence of death. Justice needed to be served. The betrayal could not go unanswered. The fate of the two men who had brought so much fear and chaos now rested in the hands of the man they had tried to destroy. But as Hakan looked at the two wretched men, he turned his gaze to Lillian. He saw no thirst for vengeance in her eyes, only a deep weariness of the cruelty of men. She had endured so much, yet her spirit had not been poisoned by hate. He knew then that true justice was not about retribution. He made a decision worthy of a great chief, one that would be remembered for generations. "Death is too easy a path for men like these," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "Their punishment will be to live with the shame of what they have done. Their own greed will be their prison." This was a justice of the spirit, not the body. He let them go. His warriors took their weapons, their horses, and all of their supplies, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They were left to face the vast, unforgiving prairie alone, two greedy men with only their shared treachery for company. It was a slow but fitting end, a sentence of exile that was far more profound than a quick death. As the last echoes of their curses faded on the wind, a deep peace settled over the village. The threat was gone. The cycle of violence had been broken not by more violence, but by wisdom. The Aranai had won not just a battle, but a moral victory. Lillian stood beside Hakan as the sun began to rise, painting the sky with the soft colors of a new day. The stone hawk pendant around her neck felt warm against her skin. She had journeyed through betrayal, fear, and loss, but she had found not just a refuge, but a true home. Hakan took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Their separate paths, which had begun with a lie and were fraught with pain, had finally merged into one. On this land where she had once been a piece of property, she had found freedom, respect, and love. She had proven that the true worth of a spirit can never be measured in horses or gold, but only in courage and heart.
That is all for today, folks. Until we meet again, take care out there.